And I believe we're live. Okay.
Awesome.
Hello, everyone. Even though I
Hello.
can't see anyone, but besides the team, but thank you all, and welcome to Code Mentor Office Hours. Thank you all for coming. My name is Debbie, and thank you all for tuning in with us today. As you guys all probably know, we're here with Hasib from Airbnb, and we'll be
Hey, everybody.
talking. And we'll be talking about sort of his journey to Airbnb. So since this is going to be an open Q&A style, we encourage that everyone, if you have any questions, you can post it either on the Google Hangouts event page that I sent out, or if you're watching us live already, on the right-hand side of the screen, it should have a column where you can ask questions. So you can feel free to post a question there. And I already have some questions from people who sent me some questions for Hasib today. And we'll kind of start out with, so Hasib, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and a brief background?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So my name is Hasib. My background is pretty weird. So I used to be a professional poker player, and I played poker professionally from when I was 16 until I was 21. After I quit poker, I went back to school. So I withdrew from school to play poker. I went back to school, ended up finishing a degree in English from the University of Texas at Austin, and relevant to the sort of tech storyline. 4 years, I think, after I got, or no, 4 years after I quit, I decided that I was going to try to break into tech, specifically so that I could earn to give, which we might talk about later at some point. So I decided that the best way, actually, originally what was happening was I was going to join a startup, and the startup I was going to join, I didn't really have any particular skills that were relevant to a startup at the time. And so the person told me, like, well, I know you're a smart guy, why don't you just come and do marketing for us? And I didn't know anything about marketing. But the one thing that I had learned is that from reading a lot of articles, that marketing people in tech startups need to be technical. They need to be like growth hacker type people, right? And so I started doing these online tutorials on like HTML and JavaScript and SQL, and I realized that I really liked it and that I was picking it up really quickly. And the thing that I finally figured out was that I could just join a coding bootcamp and learn how to code and join this company as an engineer instead of as a marketer, which I didn't really have any desire to do. So I applied to every single bootcamp in the Bay Area. I ended up getting in. I was living in Austin at the time. I ended up getting into App Academy, which was my top choice. I went there. I studied App Academy. The startup in question never ended up getting funded, so that was kind of a wash. And I ended up graduating from App Academy at the top of my class. They decided to hire me. So I started off as a TA and eventually became an instructor. 3 months later, I was promoted to director of product. And then about a couple months ago, I decided that I wanted to, move on from App Academy and try to get a job in industry as a software engineer. And so I had this crazy job search where I applied to tons of companies and couldn't get anywhere. And then suddenly I started like mining referrals and being a little smarter about it. And then I was able to get places. I ended up getting a total of 8 offers from companies. I think the biggest companies among which were Google, Yelp, Uber, Airbnb, Stripe. And I ended up deciding to join Airbnb. So I am now a software engineer at Airbnb, and I've been there for about a month now. And that is basically the story.
Oh, wow. That's a lot in just a few minutes.
Yeah. There's a lot more to it too, but that's like the sort of. Unfortunately, I have a story that's hard to encapsulate in about a minute, but that's basically the background.
Okay, nice. So can you
Yeah.
kind of talk a little bit more about sort of when you decided that you kind of wanted to go instead of going into marketing, go right into coding? Kind of like, did you do any sort of research regarding like coding jobs? Like, was this something that you really thought that you'd be interested in doing after,
Right.
just aside from just basic coding? Like, is this
Mm.
something you'd want to do kind of in the long run?
Yeah. Good question. So when I was sort of having this series of sort of personal revelations, um, it was kind of challenging because I thought like, oh, this is a really great opportunity. Like the guy who was offering me this role at a startup was like a really, really sharp guy who knew me from outside of tech, and I was like, oh man, he's taking a shot on me. He's gambling on me. So I should like, throw my chips in and like kind of go do this thing, even though I'm not super excited about marketing. But the thing that I think that I realized, like, one, I knew that, tech was very, very, tech is very big and it's getting bigger. Like, it's becoming an increasingly important part of society. I mean, tech entrepreneurship was something I always was kind of interested in and was sort of always on my radar, even when I was a professional poker player, even when I was, studying English and philosophy at school. I was always really fascinated by technology and internet companies specifically. And so I always kind of knew in some part of my mind that I wanted to go to Silicon Valley and, kind of join that ecosystem.
All right. So can you kind of tell us more about like why did you decide to join a boot camp instead of maybe like self-study?
Join the boot camp. I'm sorry?
Why did you decide to apply for App Academy instead of studying on your own, like studying coding on your own?
Yeah. I think for me, so that was something that I kind of considered, but two things that I think. One is that from just what I've learned personally, especially like so one thing I should also mention, because it kind of informs some other stuff in my life, is that after I quit poker, I worked for several years as a mental coach, primarily for professional poker players. So basically by a mental coach, like I did stuff like help them improve their decision making, like control their emotions better, optimize their learning. A lot of stuff that goes into like getting really good at the game of poker. And so a lot of that really informed my approach to tech and how I might build a career and learn this new skill and get really good at it. And one of the things that I just know personally about myself is that I am much better focused and more sort of directed in what I'm doing if I have structure. If I don't have structure and I'm sort of having to impose structure on myself, it's never as good. Like the same thing. It's the same reason why, like when I work out, I like to go work out in a class, right? That like starts at a certain time, and it's like like a kickboxing class or like a CrossFit class, rather than just like go to a gym and be like, all right, I'm going to force myself to do 50 burpees. I'm probably I'm much less likely to do something as hard and strenuous and as continuous as I will if I have the structure imposing it on me.
Okay, I see.
So yeah, so I didn't actually know that much about coding boot camps until like I started really researching into them and doing more of that sort of thing. And one of the things that I saw, which I think most people see, is that most of these boot camps claim to have very high placement rates, and like get tons of people, help them break into industry. And some of that is certainly, a lot of that is marketing, especially now as coding boot camps are saturating the market more and more. And all these statistics can't obviously be straightforwardly true for every single boot camp out there, because like there have to be some bad ones, right? But like no one will tell you which ones are bad. But that too was kind of like part of the draw, is that, oh well, if I do this, supposedly there's a 90 some number of nines, right, percent chance that it'll end up getting in and getting into industry. So that was also a big motivator for me.
All right. So along those lines, like, did you look at other coding boot camps besides App Academy?
Yeah, I applied to I want to say like 7 or 8 boot camps in San Francisco, and in San Jose. But the big draw for App Academy, so really for me, it was between App Academy and Hack Reactor. But the tough thing about Hack Reactor was that they only did JavaScript, and pretty much like none of the other boot camps in San Francisco did JavaScript. So I was like, well, if I'm going to learn a language and like take a shot at it, I'd rather take a shot at like 80% of the startups rather than just like this one. That was the first thought that I had. The second one was also that they had a really long wait list. So like I think their first cohort was going to start in like June, and it was February at the time that I was applying. And I was like, I don't want to wait that long. Like, I don't believe that if there's a difference between these two schools, like it's worth 2 months of waiting. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to go straight App Academy. And if App Academy doesn't take me, I'll take the next shortest school. But in my mind, it was like, I just need to like be done with a coding boot camp and go look for a job as fast as possible. Because, that seemed more important to me than like getting into necessarily like the most exclusive boot camp.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
So even if I didn't get an App Academy, I'd be like, I'd rather go to like a crappier boot camp rather than wait another 3 months.
Yeah. Okay, I see. And so how was your experience at App Academy?
It was great. It was fantastic. I mean, it was extremely intense. I mean, I don't know how many people like are that familiar with boot camps, but essentially the way it works is like you come in. Well, you have like a significant amount of prep work you do beforehand of just like learning the basics of programming, and then you go in. You spend better part of 3 months just coding and like learning. You have like TAs who are always there who are like reviewing your code. You have lectures every day where you learn a new concept. Every day you have like a giant project that you're there to implement. Almost every day you're pair programming somebody, and so it's just a lot. It is a shitload of like new stuff getting thrown at you, and you're just drinking from a fire hose for like 3 months straight. And I think people handle it very differently. And at App Academy, this is not true at all coding bootcamps, but at App Academy there are also like intermittent tests that if you're not learning or like not actually putting the time in, you're going to get booted from the program. So there's a lot of pressure. Like it's very much like it's called a boot camp, I think, for a good reason. And like when I was there, I think I probably outworked most of the people in my cohort because I was just in the office every single day from like 9 a.m. when things opened until almost midnight. I was coming out on the weekends and doing the same thing, just because. I mean, part of it was that like I moved from Austin to come to San Francisco to do this thing, and if I did not get a job in tech, like I'm screwed. Like there's nothing else. So there was that, and there also that like I enjoyed it, and it was genuinely fun. But yeah, and certainly not everybody has that quite level of like monastic discipline when they join a boot camp, but that was like what it was for me. It was like I need to learn as much as I can so I can get a job at such and such place. It was funny actually. Originally, when I joined App Academy, my goal was I want to get into Pivotal Labs because I thought that Pivotal Labs was like the coolest company in the world. And then it turns out that like a lot of App Academy students get into Pivotal Labs, and so then at a certain point, like I was talking with a buddy of mine, and he was like, "Oh, you should shoot for like a top tier tech company. Like Pivotal Labs is not." It's not like, I mean, it's a great company, but it's not like shooting for the moon, Yeah. And so I was like, all right, well, I guess I should pick a harder goal then. And so my goal was Facebook. I was like, I want to get into Facebook. I didn't know very much about Facebook. Didn't know why Facebook was the goal, but I was like, oh, it's Facebook, just because I just know.
Everyone's using it,
I know, exactly. And so I just set this goal for myself, and that was a really strong motivator for me to like stay in the office until midnight, right? Because it was like, well, no one else is doing this, but no one else is going to get into Facebook, right? So blah, blah, blah. Ironically, I never got even interviewed at Facebook because they just threw away my resume. But it helped me, even just setting that really aggressive goal for myself, I think helped me kind of get on this really, really narrow path. So I think it was a good thing. But yeah, that was my bootcamp experience.
Okay. So you talked about kind of going into the bootcamp like every day.
Yeah.
Was there a time where you kind of felt like you were kind of feeling burnt out?
Yeah, definitely. I think towards the latter part of the course, I was definitely getting like very, very fatigued. And I think like a really important thing in a boot camp, especially because it's such a like it's so unlike a university or school because there's just a high rate of intensity, and there's really, quite often, like you are the only person who's going to make sure that you are being healthy and you are sleeping enough and you are like taking care of yourself, because you can totally make your way through a boot camp and be utterly unhealthy and just like destroy yourself, and that to some degree, like I kind of did that, although I pulled back and was like, okay, I need to start being more conscious about like sleeping more and like making sure that I, am working out on a regular basis, right? Because when I first moved out to San Francisco, in Austin, I was working out almost every day. And then when I came out to San Francisco, like just cold turkey, nothing. Because I didn't even know like a gym in San Francisco. So the only exercise I got was like walking to the office in the morning. So yeah, so I think there are a lot of things that like you have to be attentive to, especially if you're being really hardcore with like a regimen like that. But I think you can still do it. I think it's just a matter of it's a matter of some degree of moderation, right? Mm-hmm. And knowing that, I think like one of the big things for me that was really tough is like if I didn't like, so oftentimes I'd be up really late and I hadn't read something, or there was some part of what we were supposed to learn for the next day that I didn't understand. And I was like, if I just go to bed, I'm just going to not understand this, right? And realizing that, almost always the marginal hour spent sleeping is more valuable than the marginal hour spent studying, You know, like sleep is just so good for your brain and so good for your, you know, long-term memory retention and just the ability to make new memories. That like, even though it seems like, oh, but I'm not going to learn this, you know, I'm not going to learn about promises, or I'm not going to learn about jQuery or this thing. Just sleep, and like you'll just do much better the next day. So it took me a while to really internalize that.
Okay. So I guess let's say I'm a coding bootcamp student and I'm in like halfway through and I'm feeling very burnt out. So besides sleep, any other
Yeah.
tips do you have, or any other tools that you think can help? Maybe like, have you ever used something online maybe that helped you, or some sort of app?
I'm not too big into like the using apps to sort of self-regulate. I mean, the only thing that I would say is that I think meditation is a really good way to kind of relieve stress and like just get some centeredness in your life. And so like there's this great app called Headspace, which I always recommend for meditation. But I think a lot of it just comes down to like taking regular breaks, asking for help. You know,
Yes.
very often like getting burnt out, it's often a function of like emotional fatigue, where, you know, so many of the emotions that you'll often go through in a coding bootcamp, which are intensified by the perspectives of people who might already be in industry and might think like, oh, what you're doing is bullshit, or like, you know, people who go to boot camps, they can't become engineers, they can't learn, you know, algorithms or CS or whatever it is that they claim. That it's like, you know, there are these claims of illegitimacy, right? And that induces this fear that, you know, maybe I'm a fraud, and maybe like the stuff I'm learning is not good enough for me to get a job or be productive in industry. And so I think that fear probably induces a lot of fatigue, and just being willing to talk to people about it and be like, hey, you know, I'm feeling really anxious about whether I can actually do this. And I think just being open instead of like trying to hide it and trying to be sort of, you know, trying to soldier essentially, I think it's probably one of the best things for most people. You know, that's one thing I've genuinely I felt at times, and I think I've observed in a lot of people as well, is that like they don't talk about those anxieties, and those things just like they weigh on you. You know, just more baggage that you're trying to pull around as you're trying to do something that's very hard.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you basically in the boot camp, you're learning like all this information within 12 weeks, and everything like is usually really like fast paced, like you mentioned. And so kind of how did you stay on top of all of like everything you were learning and practicing?
Right. How did I stay on top? That's a good question. I'm not sure that I did. I mean, I think there's like presumption in that question that I was especially on top of things. I don't think I was. I don't think anybody is. Like, unless you've done web development before, if you go into like a high intensity boot camp, which like all the really good boot camps will be very high intensity, you know, and if you go into a very high intensity boot camp, then if you're not struggling, you're either a super genius or you've done this before, or you're doing it wrong, right? You're just not doing the work. So I think like struggling is sort of how you know you're doing it right. Like if you're at bootcamp and you're not struggling, you're probably not actually doing everything that you're supposed to be doing. So maybe that's a bit of a cheeky way to answer that question. But in terms of staying on top of things, I think it's like a big part of it is just being okay with things slipping through the cracks. You know, like if you freak out every time you don't learn something, you're just gonna die of a heart attack at like week 3. You know, you're just not gonna make it. You have to be okay with not learning everything, because it's like, I mean, that's why I liken it to drinking from a fire hose, right? Is that the expectation is not that you will absorb every single gallon of water and become this, you know, giant bloated person by the time you're done. Like, no, you're only going to absorb as much as you can, but, you know, be okay with that. Like, don't freak out about it. Don't, you know, think it's the end of the world or that you're a fraud because you don't remember this thing that you studied in week 3 of your boot camp. Like, that's not how learning works, you know? You're going to learn things through repetition and through solidifying them by putting them into practice. So a boot camp is like a place where you can get exposed to all these things, but it's not, you know, to some degree, like you're going to get some learning is going to get consolidated just because you do it all the time during a boot camp, like, you know, programming or object-oriented design, because almost everything that you do during the boot camp is going to require programming and object-oriented design. But there are certain things that like you're just not going to do again, right? So like if you do a class on like DOM manipulation for one day, and then you don't do that again until, you know, week 8 or week 9, and you forget all about it, and then you freak out, you know, well, of course you wouldn't remember it because you're not repeatedly putting it into use. Be okay with that. That's how it's supposed to work. The promise is not you will memorize everything that we throw at you and you will just be able to vomit them on command to an interviewer. Like some of the things you're going to solidify, but other things are going to be more shallow understanding, and then you can go back and gain that more deeper level of understanding once you actually like review and study on your own.
Okay. Let's see, what was my next question? Sorry. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, I remember now. So,
Okay.
was there anything like you wish someone would have told you before you went to App Academy, or?
That's a really good question. Something I wish somebody would have told me.
Is there anything like you didn't expect at all when jumping right in?
Let me think. What is something I didn't expect at all? I mean, there's certain. I can start by mentioning things I didn't expect that surprised me. One thing that surprised me was how high school like it kind of was. I wasn't expecting that, but I guess like that's just a product of like this being like your entire life, like for a lot of people for a very short amount of time, And like when I came into boot camp, I was like, I'm going to be laser focused on like this thing, and that's all. Like I don't know. It's like that's just like the way I had it set up in my mind. And it turned out to be like very, very like cliquish and like, all these people, I don't know. It's just the way humans are when they, get together in a confined space and like this becomes their whole world. Right. So that surprised me, but I don't know that it would have made a difference if someone told me that. I'm trying to think if I have like anything like good and meaty that I can throw out there to somebody who's considering a coding boot camp. Yeah, I guess the only thing that I would say is kind of what I already said, which is that like, don't worry if you don't learn everything. You're not supposed to learn everything. I think that would be something that would probably reduce my own anxiety and make me more comfortable with learning in that environment.
Right. So what about for like some of the things that were a bit more difficult for you to pick up? Like, what did you do to kind of improve your skills in that area after the boot camp?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, it's kind of tough because I left the boot camp and kind of went immediately into working for App Academy. And so partially like from teaching and also doing other stuff, like I just picked it up on my own. And also just from doing software development for App Academy itself. There were some things like, I remember actually SQL Day, the first day we learned SQL, like that was probably the toughest day for me in App Academy. I really, really struggled on that day. I was not grokking like self joins and like other more complicated like multi-step joins. Like they just weren't working in my head. And I remember later that evening, like I was like paired with the best guy in our boot camp, and so he was like just blazing through the stuff, and I was just like, oh, I think I understand, like faking my way through it. It was really bad, but I felt so I was like so acutely aware that like I don't know this stuff, like I need to really understand this. And so I decided to, let me actually shut down Slack so that doesn't happen again. And yeah, I was like so kind of freaked out, which I don't know that it was the correct response, but that I basically went back and like did the entire day's assignments again by myself, which like took another like 5 hours, because you're supposed to do it like basically 7 hours over the day. And so as soon as like the day was over, we ended at 6, and then I was just working until like almost midnight, just doing everything again, just so that like I understood it on my own. So I don't know, be obsessive. Maybe that's the answer. I don't know how you generalize that advice, but that seemed to work for me.
Okay. So I guess moving on from our coding boot camps to sort of the job hunt. So like after App Academy, or after teaching at App Academy for a few months. So kind of like, can you tell us like how was it, and was it what you expected? Because I know like most boot camps, they kind of try to prep you for the job hunt process.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because actually I had a lot of input, and like I helped teach part of the portion of our course where we talk about the job hunt. And so I was very intimately aware, like I'd talked with a lot of students who were going through job hunts. Like, so I was like, I had my own mental image of what a job hunt was supposed to be like. But I also knew like ex-instructors from App Academy who like gone out and like done job hunts in industry. And, you know, the typical App Academy student job hunt looked much more, you know, it was considerably more difficult than the job hunt of somebody who's an ex-instructor. So I was like, oh, my job hunt is going to be more like these guys, you know, like I'm gonna apply, or like, you know, I know one guy who like literally didn't apply anywhere, and like recruiters just reached out to him and he got offers from Uber and Google as like the only two companies to talk to. And so I was like, well, you know, I'm probably going to be fine. And of course, what ended up happening was that I was anything but fine. Every single company that I applied to rejected me without even looking at me. Like they didn't want to phone screen me. They didn't want to anything. And I quickly realized after a few weeks and 20 plus rejections that, and I remember actually one rejection where I actually chatted. It was with Udacity. And I had sent them, I saw like on their job postings page, they had like a CSS error that like they had like messed up some formatting. And so I like went into like I made a video of myself going into the developer tools, like fixing the CSS error, showing them like the rule that would fix this problem, and then sending that along with my application and being like, hey, you know, I can fix this bug for you. The recruiter like called me up and he was like, hey, it's funny, blah, blah, blah. You know, yeah, let's see if we have any openings. And then he was like, he called me back a day later and was like, sorry, we're not looking for anybody with your skill set. And I got rejected. No technical screen, nothing. And like just like that one, I was like, really? Really?
Yeah.
Even after that? And so every single company was just throwing just nothing, no response at all. And so that freaked me out because I was like, wow, it might just be that like, even though I've worked at App Academy, my background is like so weird and janky that like no company wants to mess with me. So I decided that maybe the best way to break that barrier would be to look for referrals, right? And you know, I sort of knew that like referrals are kind of a way to like break the automated process, right? Like you sort of cut through that membrane and basically talk to, it's like, you know, getting to press the operator button when you're calling into support, right? It's like, just let me talk to a human being. Like I promise, like if someone talks to me, they will think I know what I'm doing, you know? And so I started talking with like a lot of my students. So my students from App Academy, because App Academy places a lot of people in industry. So, you know, I had students who worked at like 23andMe, who worked at Google, who worked at, what other companies did I get referrals to? Yelp, actually, yeah, a number of other companies. I can't list them all, but yeah. So I talked with a bunch of people, and I was like, "Hey, you know, I'm looking to apply to these companies. Can you tell me more about it? Like, I'm just kind of want to know what your process was like as you were applying here." And most of them were happy to refer me, especially since, you know, I was like their teacher, right? So ostensibly they had high opinions of me. So that way I was able to finally break in, right? Like finally I was able to actually like talk to people, get phone screens, and actually like, you know, code or like prove that I actually knew what I was doing rather than just get rejected on the basis of my resume. So the first interview that I did was at 23andMe, which if you're not familiar, they're like a bio, what is it? Like a bio, I guess you call it biotech? Like a biotech company, they like analyze your chromosomes based on like a spit sample and then tell you how likely you are to be sensitive to caffeine, or I don't know, a million crazy things, right? How irritable you are, like how Irish you are, or whatever. So that's what 23andMe does. But like, you know, they're a software-based platform. So a buddy of mine who I had paired with while I was at App Academy, he was working at 23andMe. And so, and they're like a Python shop. But Ruby and Python are fairly close, and I'd done a lot of Ruby development at App Academy. So he referred me. I did a phone screen, and actually in the phone screen at 23andMe, one of the questions they asked me was actually like the topic of one of the lectures that I give at App Academy. So like I basically like just blew that phone screen out of the water. Like the guy pretty much told me that like that's the best answer he's ever heard of that question. The question was literally, well, actually, I didn't say the question, but it was how to build a specific data structure, and actually give a lecture on how to build that data structure. So I like just talked and like basically covered pretty much everything. So that was really great. And then I went into the onsite. I thought like I nailed the onsite. Every single person there thought I was great. Like they were like, yeah, you did really well. Like that was really fast. You got the answer. You know, we've got all this extra time. I guess let's just chat. And that was like interview after interview. And so I was like, man, finally, I've got an onsite. I killed it. It's great. And then I end up getting rejected from the company. And that really, really messed with me because I was like, I did everything right. Like, I know, like, I went back and like looked at the questions again and made sure that I actually had the optimal answers. And I did to pretty much every single problem that I was given. So I don't know. I have no idea to this day why they rejected me. And like, there are a lot of reasons, right? Like, somebody could have just been like, I don't like that guy, or I don't think he's a good fit, or, or they could have just not, the role that they maybe were interviewing me for just ended up evaporating before they could make me an offer. A lot of things happen. So it didn't necessarily even have anything to do with me, but it freaked me out. It really, really scared me. So after that, I started getting more interviews at companies and really kind of getting more in the groove of interviewing. And I ended up lining up a bunch of interviews at a lot of tech companies. So I started with TripleByte. Oh crap! Did I lose you?
Yeah,
oh.
I don't know what happened. It just kind of.
Oh yeah.
Went off on me.
Was I still on air, or was I totally gone?
I think you were still on air. My Windows kind of just.
I was okay.
Sorry
gotcha.
about that.
Okay.
Okay.
So should I just keep talking where I was, or should I?
Yeah. No worries. Just go ahead.
Okay. Cool. Totally. So basically, I ended up first applying to TripleByte, which for those people who are not familiar, TripleByte is like one of these, it's kind of a Hire.com competitor, where basically what they do is you go through this kind of anonymous screening process where you do like a coding test and like you answer questions about software engineering. And if you sort of pass this bar, they invite you to an onsite. If you pass the onsite, then and this is all without credentials, so they don't know who you are, they don't know where you're from, they don't know how long you've been working, whether you've got a CS degree, all of it, it's completely blind. And on the basis of that, they introduce you to YC companies, so companies that are in the Y Combinator alumni network. So I applied to them, actually ended up getting rejected from Hired, and pretty much all the other hiring platforms like just were bunk. They didn't give me anything, or they just rejected me outright. But TripleByte, I went through their entire process, and they decided to work with me, and they were also surprised that I didn't have a CS degree. And so they introduced me to a couple companies, namely Gusto and Flexport. Interviewed at Flexport, didn't get an offer. Interviewed at Gusto, did get an offer. And then around the same time, like a lot of the companies that I had talked to and gotten referrals from other people, they've finally decided to like kind of move forward in their process. So I got all of Gusto and Yelp ended up making me offers around the same time. And then TripleByte itself decided to make me an offer. And so once I had these first three offers, then things started kind of shooting off like fireworks. And so then I ended up getting Google, got an onsite from Google. I ended up passing the interview and got an offer from them. I got an interview and onsite from Stripe and Uber, and I got offers from both of them as well. And then I think the very last interview, so at that point, like pretty much Google was the strongest company in the running, and I was pretty convinced that I was going to join Google. But then kind of in the 11th hour, I ended up getting an interview at Airbnb. And Airbnb was a company I'd really, really liked for a long time. They're also a Rails shop, which is nice because I learned Rails and taught Rails. So that was like a distinct plus to me. And so I interviewed there. I really, really loved the company and everybody that I spoke to. It's like the office is amazing, which I'm sure anybody who's been to Airbnb will tell you. They like rave about the office before they talk about anything else. Because it's insane. It's a beautiful office. But so anyway, yeah. So I ended up getting an offer from them, and the offer was really strong. I ended up negotiating, and the very end, I was kind of torn between Google and Airbnb, but I decided Airbnb would be the better place to go. And I signed with Airbnb, and I just started working there about a month ago. So that, in a nutshell, is the story of my job search.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess going back to I know you got rejected from a lot of places. So can you kind of talk about how you coped with that, since it sounds pretty challenging?
Yeah. It is very challenging. Especially, I mean, like for me, I don't even think like I know a lot of students who've had very, very hard job searches, and like, and compared to them, mine wasn't really that hard. Like, I went for about like a couple months just getting rejections from companies, but I know people who've gone like 11 months of getting nothing but rejections from companies, and so in that perspective, my job search wasn't that bad. But there were definitely like, you know, when I was getting rejected from lots and lots of companies and nobody wanted to look at my resume, I was definitely freaking out, and I was definitely very worried that I would not really be able to make this transition into software engineering. Even though like I taught it and I knew to some degree that like I was good, because like otherwise, like, you know, a lot of my students were getting into these companies and like I was getting rejected without even a phone screen. So I know that I knew that it couldn't be that like I was just awful, and because no one had even checked if I was awful, right? No one had given me a coding challenge and had me fail at it. But it was more this fear that like the deck was just stacked against me, right? Like that it wasn't I wasn't going to be able to prove that I was good enough. And so that really scared me. And I think, you know, probably the biggest thing, I don't know how well I would have coped if this had gone on for a very long time. But I think the one getting accepted by TripleByte was like the real big thing that kind of gave me back my confidence. Not even that TripleByte, you know, ended up giving me any offers. I didn't even know that at the time. But just that like TripleByte decided to work with me on the basis of this anonymous